Kia ora, and welcome to Cinema in Context. My name's Sarah Watt.
I'm William Chen.
And I'm Jeremy Downing.
And each month on Cinema in Context, we like to look at two films with a connection between. It could be the same director, the same actor, or a similar theme. Now, this month on Cinema in Context, we're discussing two female-led films, Midsommar, which came out in 2019, starring the wonderful Florence Pugh, and a film whose title we all forget constantly, but if I remember correctly, it's Don't Worry, Darling, a film directed by Olivia Wilde, also starring the wonderful Florence Pugh. Now, before we embark on this discussion, we must say we do spoiler these films as we discuss them in great depth. And so, if you have not seen Come to Daddy, Darling, Don't Worry, Darling, or Midsommar, and you feel that spoilering would lessen the impact for you in due course, then please pause this and return to us when you've seen them. Otherwise, sit back, strap in, because I know for sure, without having discussed it, there is going to be some contentious discussion ahead.
Some might say heartbreak feels good in a place like this.
Oh!
Well, should we clarify the connection, right? So you've said two films starring
There's more
Florence
to it than
Pugh,
that, yes.
I can't speak. Florence Pugh, and I don't know, clueless Florence Pugh films? Would that
Clueless Pugh?
Gaslit. I would say gaslit duped Florence Pugh films.
Nice.
Because clueless almost implies that she's just a dafty. Whereas
I guess so, but spoilers, right?
we're going to spoiler, aren't we?
I know, but if we were to call it that, the title of our episode, I'm thinking, would gaslighting be a spoiler for Don't Worry, Darling?
Not if people have seen the trailer. Don't know for sure.
Nice.
Well, let's see how we go.
Excellent.
Also, both films taking place in broad daylight.
Yes, which is a
Yeah.
very interesting point that I am sure we will get on to.
Do you want to give us a summary of some of the films, William? You take your pick.
All right. Guys. So I just watched a visually resplendent psychological thriller where the blonde heroine, played by one of 2020's hottest up-and-comers, ventures into a retro wonderland of eye-catching fashion, decadent lifestyles, and sick needle drops. But not all is as it seems, and as reality starts to unravel, our heroine discovers that behind this hedonistic veneer lies the dark reality of deep-rooted misogyny of the era. As she struggles to convince people that she isn't mad and break free from this waking nightmare, she's pursued by specters of male control and domination. But enough about last night in Soho. Wait, guys, wait.
But
I
wait, there's
also
more.
just watched the movie starring Olivia Wilde, where our heroine yearns to escape from a digital world into the real world by traveling across a wasteland to reach a magical portal, escaping a megalomaniacal villain who wants to create a world free of perceived imperfection. But enough about Tron Legacy.
Whoa.
Wait, guys.
Oh, wow.
Guys, triple whammy. I recently saw a pretty crappy episode of Black Mirror where the first act was extended almost to feature length, dragging out the mystery to an almost laughable extent and leading to the most nonsensical payoffs. Also, may have ripped off Serenity, not the Joss Whedon one, the one where Matthew McConaughey and Anne Hathaway are in a video game. But enough about Don't Worry, Darling! Hey!
All right, there's going to have to be some clarifying going on.
Yeah.
Tell us about Midsommar, Jeremy.
Well, Midsommar is a film directed and written by Ari Aster, I believe is how you pronounce it. A follow-up to his kind of groundbreaking film Hereditary. This film stars, as we've mentioned, Florence Pugh, who has recently lost her family in a horrifically tragic series of events. And I guess it happens at a time where her and her boyfriend are potentially on the cusp of breaking up. And so he sort of feels like he owes her a little bit more grace during this very hard period. And so decides to invite her to a trip to Sweden with a group of his friends with varying degrees of frustration and kind of happiness amongst the friend groups or apathy. And so Florence Pugh's character joins these boys as they head off to Sweden to spend time in a community that one of their friends is from. And they engage in this community. It's very different in culture to what they're used to. And as the film goes on, things start to not quite add up. And Florence Pugh is right at the centre of it.
And it all happens in broad daylight.
Yeah, it does. But interestingly, I haven't seen the director's cut, but I believe that there is some obviously extra scenes added back in, and one of them is a nighttime sequence in the 2 or 3 hours of night that they have in the location of where they are, which I'm really glad that they didn't have that in the film, and it actually makes me not want to watch the director's cut, because the only time we see nighttime is either at the start when she's in the States or through a dream sequence. The daylight is what is a daylight horror they're calling it. It's this. Yeah, it's a new genre, I guess. I don't know how many films.
And I didn't know that, but definitely I caught myself watching while I was watching Midsommar, going, "Wow, I can't believe how nerve-wracking this is, and yet it's daylight, and how unusual that is." And you know, guys, how whenever we talk about horror films, I always go back to Nightmare on Elm Street, which is my all-time favorite, and I consider it to be one of the best horror films ever, which also has a lot of daylight scenes with people napping in the school classroom, or just being in the daytime, and Freddy Krueger still comes in day. And I think, wow, that's super clever, because, you know, your Friday 13th and all that traditionally happen at night. Cabin in the Woods happens at night, and we're used to those being horrific times of the day, aren't we? So it's really effective. If you can scare the bejesus out of people, are we allowed to say bejesus?
Yeah, why not?
If you can scare the bejesus out of people during the daytime, then flipping heck, I think what you're doing is super clever.
That's a nice connection with Friday the 13th. Nightmare on Elm Street, because you're absolutely right. Those are very scary scenes, and it's this idea that you can't get away from your brain. You know, it's quite terrifying.
Yeah.
What did you think of the movie? Because William and I both have seen it before.
Midsommar?
Midsommar, yeah.
Right, so
it was your first time,
It
right?
was,
Yeah.
and I've been hearing about Midsommar since it came out in 2019. Everybody had raved about it, including my husband. Now, my husband is a real sweetheart, and he knows that I don't have a huge emotional stomach for supernatural horror. It's not that I have issues with gore, but I'm not big on supernatural, and I can't be doing with religious horror. So he wasn't sure how I would deal with more of the folk horror aspects of it, and I didn't actually find that challenging at all. So I was going to say, in a nutshell, there are no nutshells in this 45-minute podcast. Sorry about it. So flippin' heck, the opening of Midsommar I thought was absolutely astonishing. And I do feel that the most horrific, frightening, scary, sits with you in a horrible way aspect of the film is not people falling face first off a cliff, although that is handled horrifically, but is actually the opening sequence. And I thought it was absolutely sensational, not because of the horrificness of her losing her family, but the whole lead up was so expertly written, in my humble opinion, of having been a girl in relationship with a boy who actually wanted to break up with me. Hard as it will be to believe, guys, that did used to happen to me. But flippin' heck, it was so expertly written. And that wonderful scene where she's on the phone to the boyfriend, played by the wonderful Jack Rayner, who's an Irish actor who I saw years ago in a film called What Richard Did, and he was sensational, and I'd highly recommend it. It's a deeply indie, low-budget film. Right,
the brother in Sing Street.
Exactly. So Richard was a main role, and that's a bit of a psychological thriller type film, if I recall correctly. He's terrific. But anyway, so nicely handled. You know, and they're sort of gaslighting her a little bit even then, aren't they? Oh, you know, your girlfriend's just a bit psycho. You've got to stop jumping every time she rings. And then all of a sudden it transpires she has horrifically good cause to fear for it. Oh my God, that whole opening sequence, right up into them getting on the aeroplane and then arriving in Sweden, where it's actually sunshine and white dresses, and oh my God, absolutely sensational. Then really enjoyed the whole film. Up until the part where she, and this is all the spoilers, guys listening, right up until the part where she is crowned the May Queen. And then I didn't really care anymore. And then to me it descended into, the boy's got to have sex. We've got to see a whole lot of Jack Rayner's bottom pumping in and out, and a whole lot of nude ladies standing around, and it all just suddenly, I mean, it was still fine, but it wasn't the 5-star film that it had been for maybe that first 80% or... Actually, I did do the math at the time, so I can't remember, 75% or whatever.
I saw this film at the cinema in 2019, and I just absolutely loved it. And I remember so clearly, you're absolutely right, Sarah, that opening sequence is just devastating. And the image of the young woman kind of with a pipe on her
It's exactly
face,
what I keep thinking of when you're
it's
talking
so
about
horrific.
The eyes open, and then of course the camera zooms in on the unread messages.
Yeah.
Yes.
So this is all happening in real time.
Absolutely.
And then I remembered,
Horrific.
for me, the ending was the button that just made this film perfect, because I was like, where is this movie going? Like, I get the sense of it's using the cult to explore elements of what she's going through. But that moment of her really realizing that her boyfriend was a dick and she needed to end it.
Yeah.
And for that to be told, that emotional narrative to be told with her burning him alive and then smiling because she was free of this was phenomenal.
Terribly clever. And also, of course, I mean, look, I'm not giving Ari Aster a hard time for those choices, because as a book ending, as bookends, that's incredibly clever. You've got firemen at the beginning racing into a house that has not burnt down, but in which people have asphyxiated. And then at the end, you've got people dying in something that is burning down, no firemen around, and they are asphyxiating. So they're very, very cleverly
You also
constructed.
have a lot of the fairy tale imagery at the beginning. There's that image of the girl and the bear at the end as well.
Yeah.
Or the...
the painting above her bed.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
right. Which I noticed at the time. Somebody told me about it after, but I was like, no, I noticed it at the time. Right. So then when the bear turns up later, I got it. Yeah, that's right.
Also, and again, this is the kind of the next part when I rewatched it. I loved it, I think, even more than the first time. I just had a kind of this gleeful smile on my face the whole time. But other book ending was...
That's not alarming at all, Jeremy.
Well, I think, if you put aside the cult and the horror, it's such a deeply human story of like trying to make sense of this relationship. But the other book ending that just blew me away was, her screaming with her boyfriend at the start, and he's trying to console her.
Yeah.
And then that incredible act of empathy with all of the women screaming with her at the end, and the difference of that. And I realised she is surrounded by these men who have no empathy for different reasons. So the boyfriend is incredibly selfish
and undecisive. I guess that's his.
I think he's just weak, actually, mainly.
Cool.
Will Poulter's character.
Well, he's obnoxious, right?
Yeah.
And he dies
good
for
at
it.
it?
So they'll die for it for their foils. So he pees on the tree and he dies. And then the scholar, I forget his name.
Chidi from Good Place.
Yes.
Well,
he's Josh.
He's disconnected.
I love Chidi.
He's academic. And
when she sits down and sits with us, Pele? Is Pele him? She sits down and he leaves the room. Do you notice that? He's got this disconnect, this academic disconnect.
Yep.
But they all are different examples of a lack of empathy.
Yeah.
And only the people in the community show her any sense of empathy, regardless of knowing about this horror that she's enduring. And I just thought, what a wonderful, way of exploring need for community, need for connection, and realizing you're in a relationship that needs to end.
And the interesting thing is, Pele... I mean, Pele was posited to me as somebody who was potentially sinister, because he invited them to come, and when he said, I think you will become the May Queen, or I really want you to come, or whatever it was he says, I thought, as we're probably supposed to, he has bad designs on her, maybe they're going to sacrifice her, etc., etc. But in fact, when he sits with her in the big sleeping room and says that my parents perished in a fire, and you know now, don't you, which bloody fire they perished in, and obviously several ceremonies prior. And he said, but I was all right because I had this family. And then, of course, he's like, and so therefore this is now your family. Oh, well, flipping it, that turns ideas on its head, doesn't it?
Well, I mean, it's the fact that she's having to give up and effectively kill those relationships to move forward.
Yeah.
And it's told through
but also
this horror.
The fact that the horror really is the fact that the only family she now has, which is indeed an incredibly loyal, cathartic, healing family, is the very same one that allows their residents or citizens to plonk off a cliff, or who will burn people in, paralyze them and then burn them alive.
Yeah.
It's extraordinary.
Mutilate them in blood eagles.
Right.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So
what did you think, William? Because you've seen it before, and then you came back to rewatch it.
I mean, I remember you and I both gushing about it back in 2019. It was on our best of the year list, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
Watching it again, it's great. It's really, really good. And I think now that I basically know what happens, it really shines even more brightly as a comedy.
I'm sorry, what now?
This is a hilarious movie.
Sweden, people in Sweden feel that, right? They're like, this is a very great dark comedy.
Yes, which is just as well, isn't it? That they didn't get up in arms about this being an anti-tourism video.
It makes me want to go to Sweden.
There's so many facets of this movie which are like flat out just comedic. the main queen outfit at the end where she's just in this mountain of flowers.
Yeah.
Jack Rayner's face in a bear where he's just like, what the heck is going on? The meat puppets, I mean, yeah, it's grotesque. It's people with twig stuff in their faces. But when they're moved around, it just looks so chintzy and fake.
Wow, I feel differently.
Maybe,
going, though.
maybe it was. I mean, I talked about this. I remember in our interview review,
Yeah.
like why I love this movie so much more than Hereditary, which I actually quite disliked by the end of it, was because this movie doesn't take itself seriously.
I like that.
It understands that the images, not only are they grotesque, they are so over the top that you can't help but laugh at them. Whereas I feel like Hereditary kind of tries to strike the same balance, but never gets there. It tries to be spooky cult, and it just comes off as really try hard and not very scary and not very funny. Whereas I feel this is intentionally going for the comedy over the scares, and maybe it's just the sunlight over darkness.
Do you think it's because there's an acknowledgement in human nature that humans, apart from me mainly, tend to, particularly boys, human males, enjoy horror films for many different sort of cathartic reasons, but also the fact that quite often when we are frightened or when we are dealing with an uncomfortable situation, some of us will laugh. Do you know what I mean?
Possibly.
And so possibly, I don't know if he's this benevolent, and we'll talk about Ari Aster's sort of MO for creating this film in a minute, but possibly even he's giving us that opportunity for that release. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
Whereas Hereditary, which I did not see, but I did read the plot summary and I got everything out of that I needed. Interestingly, that was his first film, and Midsommar is his second, so incredibly accomplished. Because as I understand it, Hereditary is an incredibly well-made film.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, what a dude, what a filmmaker. But anyway, yeah, just wondering whether maybe he thought, oh, these people are going to need an opportunity for decompression.
In my cinema, people laughed, but it was quite enjoyable. Like it was an uncomfortable laugh, and you know, it was that sequence, the sex sequence, and it is funny and it's strange.
I think it's all the way from the point where Will Poulter is led away to the final climax. Like it just gets sillier and sillier,
and that's
sillier,
maybe what I didn't realise that, but I like that. From then onwards, that's when I say I didn't really care
That's
anymore.
so interesting.
But I didn't know that I didn't care because it was trivial or funny. I think I just thought, oh, this is now just slipping into more like tropes. Do you know what I mean?
Because for me, like all the actors start acting differently as well. Both Florence Pugh and Jack Rayner, like in their respective characters, become more into that character. You know, the clueless doofus and the girl who's kind of having this emotional breakthrough.
Yeah.
And the performances become bigger, and the performances of the supporting cast get really big as well.
Yeah.
Like at the end where the people are being burnt alive and everyone's wailing. Like, yeah, it's emotional, but it's also just really silly.
Yeah.
And there's like a small child I'm miming this, the audience, grabbing his face in his hands, going, ah! And it's like, I would have had such a good time on that set. Like, Going nuts.
I wonder if they had like cult training, you know, like this is the things that we do, because it's some beautiful ensemble work.
Yeah.
And I just want to come back to something else you said, Sarah. I absolutely agree that the writing of this film at the start in particular is
amazing.
pitch perfect, and I didn't appreciate it until I was rewatching it, and I'm like, all of the emotional beats and the turning points are there in the right order. So she's concerned, you know, you see the parents at the start and they're sleeping, you know, in inverted commas.
They're still breathing, which is really interesting.
So they must be about to die.
Because they're breathing in the CO2 or whatever it is.
And then she has that concern, and you see her concern, and then she talks with her boyfriend, and he even says then, he's like, I think you're overreacting. Like the seeds of what's the problem here are already sown.
Yeah.
Before we see the conversation with his friends, and before she realizes what's going on. It's just really well set up, and you get all of that, you know, all of that set up before the title comes up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's one of the strongest openings of a film I've seen in a long time. And I actually I went back and looked at my films of the decade, and I'm like, why did I put this on my films of the decade? Because I would add that back in my top 30 films of the 2010s over some of the films I had in there.
Yeah.
I guess I saw it once and then moved on and never went back to it, because There are some really strong pieces of filmmaking here.
And do you know what else? After the titles, then there's all that palaver with, oh, you're going to Sweden? Well, no, I don't mind. I wondered why you didn't tell me. The scripting, and also, do you notice how often he just does a long shot and he just lets them frickin' act, which is amazing. So the dialogue in that scene is, and I hate to say it, horribly familiar, because you're the girl who has a point to make and you're going, well, hang on a second, I feel a bit wronged here, and then suddenly it's twisted back on you, which is a bit like gaslighting of a sense, and you find yourself being the one who's apologising. Well, no, sorry, I didn't mean to bum you out. You don't have to leave. Forget I even said it. I shouldn't have brought it up.
And you
should have brought it up.
The mushroom sequence. Oh, so good.
Right.
If we don't take it at the same time, we're gonna trip at different times.
That's a great point.
And
And
Florence
so that
Pugh's
relationship,
performance.
yes,
It's so good. It's so good. When
Absolutely.
she goes, I'm not going to take it, Oh, no, it's fine. And just the pauses and sorry.
but she means it. No, but this is the funny thing,
Yeah.
My interpretation is she's fine with them doing it. But then it becomes, it's a bum out if you don't. You're ruining it for us. And she's the one who has to capitulate. And she's the one who has to capitulate in the very beginning. Yeah, you're right. Maybe I'm overreacting. You make me feel better. Thanks, honey. That's great. Oh, no. And also with that middle sort of, sorry for bumming you out that I'm bringing up that you're going on this trip. Actually, I shouldn't have. My bad. Forget I even said it.
It's
Brilliant.
wonderful. It's so good as well. Like, she is the only one that gets what the community's about. The
Yeah.
other ones are all there for different reasons, whether it's their research or, having sex in a random library room,
Or the English tourists who are there just as tourists.
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
True. And so she's there. She understands. And that moment of there's just a moment of understanding. That smile at the end is just again one of my favorite moments of cinema in the last 5 years. It's really, really strong.
So let me ask you something, because I have Googled the what's it out of this, and I find only a Reddit post where somebody saw what Sarah saw, but there's no confirmation. Did you notice what's Jack Rayner's character's name in this?
Christian.
Did you notice how Christian's hair gets redder and redder?
Oh, not
wow.
consciously, but now that you say
It
it,
totally 100% does. And in my mind, her hair was getting redder as well. But let's put that to one side, because as the film went on, her hair then wasn't changing. His gets redder and redder and redder.
Oh.
Now, initially when I noticed it, I do not believe he was under sunlight. And I was like, whoa, I can see something's happening here. There's symbolism at play. And then later on, because it's mainly outdoors, he was under sunlight, and I understand how the hair can look red. And it's funny because on the Reddit post someone said, well, I'm Irish and he's Irish and we all have latent red hair. Maybe that's true. So either it didn't happen on purpose, in which case it's pretty bloody clever, or bloody, because of all of the other imagery of red. You know how Christian's drink is the one that obviously has the menstrual blood in it, which makes it redder. And red being obviously symbolic, blah, 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 blah.
well, she's also has red hair, doesn't she? The girl
Exactly,
that,
that's
is going
exactly
after
right.
him.
And so that's exactly right. So I thought maybe his hair was changing that way because there was meant to be some sort of...
I think it probably is on purpose, because there's all of that visual effect that happens when they're on the hallucinogenics. The flowers are opening and closing, and I believe the grass is moving. and
growing
the
through
leaves
her
is-
hands and stuff.
There's lots, but it carries on all the way through to the end.
And his hair is consistently red towards the end.
Yeah, right.
But I don't know if it is
Okay.
just a trick of the light. But if it is just a trick of the light, it still works.
And also, you just don't know what is real and what isn't real, and it doesn't really matter by the end. Like, I still don't know whether she ate the fish or whether he was just seeing that. In fact, I even forgot that there was a scene where she ate a fish anyway. Do you remember that?
Well, I
at the
thought she
end?
didn't eat it. I thought they gave it to her and she went, ugh, and she let it slip on the floor, and they were all a little bit tut, 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 because you're supposed to, because it's tradition.
I think that was all in Christian's mind, wasn't
Well,
it?
there you go.
Because he was the one clearly having the bigger trip of the two.
Yeah.
And sort of freaking out. I guess to segue to our other film, I feel like Don't Worry Darling was trying to be Midsommar, in the sense that Midsommar had a very clear emotional arc for Florence Pugh's character that and I guess this is where we get into the discussion, was the main thing lacking from... Well, there's a few things lacking from Don't Worry Darling, but that was the biggest thing lacking for me, is that she, beyond figuring out what was going on in her situation, she wasn't coming through anything. That's my criticism. I can see the stoned stare of
Oh,
Sarah.
no, not at all. No, I'm wondering when to bring up, but so I've started, so I'll finish. Here's my thinking around what the heck is it called? Don't Worry, Darling.
Stepford-wise.
Just to lay my cards on the table, I went in going, oh, hasn't there been a lot of chitter-chatter around Olivia Wilde, blah, 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 blah. And I thought, I don't care.
What's he doing here?
Brah. I thought, I don't care. I'm just going to watch it. The trailer looks amazing. I'm going to love this film. Actually, I didn't say I'm going to love this film, but I was totally open to it. And I really, really enjoyed it. And I didn't really know exactly what was going on. But I was completely gripped because it looked beautiful. Florence is beautiful. Florence is such a good actress. I didn't mind the slightly unsubtle symbolism of smothering and being squashed and all that, because you guys don't know what it is to be a 1950s housewife who has to vacuum all day. And
I don't know what it is to own newspaper anymore as well.
yeah.
So what would I clean my windows with?
What would you? And I thought, their relationship seems a little bit too happy and lusty and happy, but this is a movie, we'll see where it's going. So when it went where it went, for me, the payoff was enormous. And I thought, far out, this is clever, I never saw this coming, that's amazing. Gentlemen of the jury, no. Do you feel that if a film is risible and then it gets to a big reveal, that even if the reveal is quite good, that it doesn't forgive the film for being inadequate or risible?
I think it really depends. For me, the problem with this film is that what happens after the reveal is so disconnected from the reveal, right? The reveal reveals everything, and yet you're left with so many more questions than answers. Doesn't fit. Well, I guess it kind of fits thematically, but in a way that's very, very trivial and surface level. So that we actually, when we get to the point where Truman shows away out of the it's a simulation, but she exits the simulation. What happens then? That's the interesting stuff.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Because I was thinking, and I came to this movie in the worst possible situation.
Yeah, I think you better
which
cough
was,
up to our listeners.
I am so sorry. This is a movie crime. The kind of a peek behind the curtain, dear listeners. We were planning to do Amsterdam as this month's review. And then it turned out that Amsterdam was actually not very good. And so I was like, okay, well, we can do Don't Worry, Darling as an alternate. But by then, I had already made up my mind that I wasn't going to see this movie and read the entire synopsis on Wikipedia. So going in, I knew what the twist was. I kind of understood where things were going. But even, I think with that in mind, when the twist did come, and I think it's relatively silly, but that's okay. Lots of movies have silly twists. Everything afterwards was like, well, what about the twist? Right? There's so many repercussions with this twist. And you end at the most interesting part of the story, having spent what felt like, well, it was probably about an hour, over an hour in bloody Act 1, right? You don't even move into Act 2 until just before the twist. And there basically is no Act 3.
I like this.
It's a car chase and then nothing.
So
right?
just to remind me...
And so the pacing just like, what is happening?
So just to remind me, the twist, and obviously, hopefully people who are listening remember that the twist is... the reveal that the funny hallucinations she's been having are actually flutters into the fact that actually she's paralyzed on a bed with her eyes pushed open and some sort of something that's making her part of a simulation. Do we then go back to her being in the simulation and then oh yes, of course, and then she's trying to say to Olivia Wilde, I know what's going on, we need to go. Olivia Wilde's character says, I know what's going on and I'm happy to stay. This is the only way I can be with my children. Right. This is like Marion Cotillard in Inception or something, isn't
except
it?
these children are fake. They were dream children in that as well, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, were they? But that's a whole other... Anyway, right. And then she does her big escape and zooms out of the cul-de-sac and does her Truman Show out.
Which doesn't make any sense because it's a simulation. Why do those guys need to physically... run after her?
Well, I think the movie just has a lot of questions it brings up, and it can be fascinating. And why I brought up the Black Mirror comparison before was because Black Mirror is so good at delving into the little details, right? Yes. Like, I don't think it's fair to bring up this big old twist and then do nothing with it, because it's not... not
answer it properly,
that's right. you leave the movie feeling really dissatisfied because there's so much meat on the table that's almost just ignored by the movie for its central thesis, which is fine as theses go, but for me it's not as interesting as everything happening around that.
Right.
I think that the film knew what it was trying to say about her character. What was the revelation? What was the shift? What was the change? What was the theme? What is the theme of this film?
Yeah, the thematic statement.
I think that film lacks a clarity there. And so that would have, if they knew what they were wanting to do in that space, then it really would have guided some of the plot and the act structure you're talking about. And I agree with you, William. That would have been far more interesting if Act 3 was her, getting out of her house and then all of a sudden the suits are coming or, and there's some kind of something. And maybe she has to go back into the game to save someone else that she's made a connection with, that... I don't know, or maybe she has to go to their real house, someone who's in the game that she knows is in danger,
and free them.
Yeah.
Gosh, this is interesting. Golly goodness, I think I might need to hang up my hat in terms of actual film analysis and criticism. I haven't been very rigorous about this film at all. I'm not saying that I'm going to have enjoyed it less because of this discussion, but you're definitely pointing out holes that I just wasn't concerned about at all. But I'd read a blog post subsequently. I'm like, what's all the fuss about? Why are people not appreciating the cleverness of the reveal? And yeah, there's things like, so what is the red plane? And why doesn't she go back and how come?
I have in caps. I have questions.
Oh, nice.
Yes. Well,
Question one.
You already bring this up. So why couldn't Alice leave the headquarters the first time she touched the windows?
No, don't. Move on. Next question.
No, wait, what do you mean?
The very first
we
time
don't even know what
she
she
gets
saw
to
in
it.
there.
And then she just wakes up again. Okay, anyway. Question 2. What do drugs actually do in the world? Like, you see people getting medicated. And wait, what is happening? Is this a metaphor?
Wait, do you mean in the simulation?
In the simulation.
But because, isn't it a bit like in a dream that when something is happening to you in your mind, your body feels that it's happening in real?
Later on, it's like if you die in the game, you die for real kind of thing.
Kind of, maybe. So in the obviously in the simulation, they're not their real selves, but obviously they're being drugged, aren't they, in order to be in that state? Okay. And maybe the justification for the brain is, therefore, this has to happen to you.
Okay, like
do you know
dream
what I mean?
logic kind of thing.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay, that's fair.
I mean, this whole movie could just be called Dream Logic.
Yeah, or Dream
and then she woke up.
Shut up. She woke up and it was all a horrible nightmare, but yeah.
So, significance of the biplane. Earthquakes? I thought the earthquakes, you could have done it so easily. They live beside the train tracks. That's all you needed to do.
Do you know what I'm wondering all of a sudden? Hey, I'm coming back to this film. I'm on your side. Don't worry, darling. Yeah. I reckon that the plane and the train tracks... The earthquakes are like the train tracks in Inception, that they are your body's way of telling you something isn't right here. Like when you're in your dream and something happens.
But she's not in control of the simulation, right?
No,
it's going bonkers.
No, but she's having flashes, right? Into something. So her brain is trying to break through, her real brain.
I don't know, because everyone else feels the earthquakes as well, right? Not just her. It's not like the other hallucinations of the mirror stuff. Harry Styles feels the earthquakes, doesn't he?
I just think that they thought, we've got this cool plot twist. We can just do a whole bunch of silly things, and it's all explained with one little device.
No, I'm going back to Inception, which I take basically as like a Bible for real life because it's so clever. And I do wonder whether, because admittedly in Inception, the other people in your hallucination, I can't remember the word that they used, but
the shared dream space,
right? Don't necessarily see or hear what's going on in some instances, but it makes sense to me that now I'm talking as a human being, in our dreams, the people in our dreams experience what we're experiencing, so therefore it doesn't seem weird to me.
But they are still
They're
people.
real people.
Oh,
real
Harry
people.
Styles is lying next to her on the bed, isn't he?
Yeah.
Olivia Wilde's a real person, and they're all real people.
Right.
And then, sorry, just to finish off my list. Speaking of real people, just the logistics of the simulation. Do we expect that when all the men oh my gosh, this movie is beautiful though. It's so pretty looking.
Yeah.
That shot where all the men come out of the driveways and it's that aerial shot of them driving down.
The choreography is
so
stunning.
good, so
and
good.
they're all going off to work.
I do have to say that I think Olivia Wilde did a really solid job of directing this film. Like I think the performances they do a really good job.
Yeah.
And whilst Harry Styles has that final scene that's just laughably average, most of the rest of his stuff is he's been really well directed.
There's a lot of flack. He's fine. He's
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah.
And I thought Olivia Wilde was such
She's
a
really
wonderful. Her performance was wonderful.
Yes.
So I think my issues are all with the script, and it's actually beautifully put together.
But yeah, that scene where they all drive out and it's like, okay, what do the husbands do every single day at Victory or during the Victory project? And the big reveal is they go to work. And so do they all start their jobs at the same time? Do they come back, like when they come home, do they have to wash up and clean after their comatose partners to keep them in the simulation? Just the logistics are really, really off. And and also, wouldn't someone figure out that there's dozens of people just missing, especially if she was a doctor in her real life? Anyway, I guess the movie isn't interested in that stuff, which is fine, maybe, because the Truman Show also ends the exact moment, he leaves his simulation.
Leaves you with heaps of questions.
And that's fine. The questions there are more scintillating and more thought-provoking than they are, niggling. But I felt that everything just didn't add up,
Well, let me ask you the biggest question on my mind when watching this film, because I thought their life looked amazing. And if I was Olivia Wilde and I'd had children and then couldn't be with children, or if I just wanted to drink gin and tonics in the garden, or I wanted to wear those beautiful dresses and ride the tram to the mall. I mean, honestly, and then flippin' Chris Pine takes them to that nightclub and they get to drink cocktails out of amazing glasses, all dressed up to the nines, and watch Dita Von Teese do burlesque. I'm thinking, this is a good life. And so therefore, I'm wondering... And this actually also then gets into films like The Giver. I don't know if you ever watched that. I used to teach it. It was a few years ago. And the whole premise of The Giver is people are living in a society that's completely constructed and they're given drugs to make sure they never question anything and therefore everything is good. And the thematic statement, I suppose, for that film is, would you rather know the truth or be lied to but live a happy life? Right, which is exactly the same as this film.
And The Matrix and Cypher, not willing to jack out of the Matrix.
Right, and so therefore, I don't know. I quite liked the whole victory living.
I guess back to your question about twists and whether no matter what the film's done, I don't think so. I don't think I mind. It really depends on the whole. And it can be a slightly goofy twist, but if they've done their work and they've earned that twist, then I'm okay. Yeah. This film reminds me of Mother, the Darren Aronofsky movie, in the sense that with Mother, there is clearly an allegory going on, and until you get enough clues to twig to what he's speaking to, you're sort of a little bit like, I'm not quite sure what's happening. I don't really know what I should be feeling about these characters because they didn't really have a clear arc or journey, and so then all you're left with is a twist to explain
redeem the whole thing.
Well, not even redeem it, just to explain the plot details. And then once it happened, I was like, oh, okay, sweet. That's exactly how I felt about this film, in the sense that I wasn't invested in Florence Pugh's character beyond her just being a great performer.
Yeah.
Because beyond being stuck in a world where she's trying to get out, which we've seen how many of those movies, there was nothing else for me to grab onto. There was no primal human emotions or... Again, we come back to that thematic statement or whatever it is.
Right.
What would it be for this movie?
There was quite a lot of primal human emotion going on between her and Harry Styles.
Am I
right? True. A lot about oral sex, wasn't there?
And when you talk about Mother, all I remember from Mother is
people sitting on the countertop.
People sitting on the kitchen counter, which is tapu. And in this film, they sit on the dining table to do the old woohoo, and that's tapu as well. So there, but anyway,
can I say that there was part of me was like, okay, it's just like the female gaze in terms of sex and how sex is represented in film.
Yes,
but there was a lot of him giving like oral sex, him going down on her,
cunnilingus,
fellatio,
yes,
and again, was that just his proclivity? I was like, but it felt significant that it was the same sex act over and over again. Especially with Chris Pine's character sort of strangely watching them in one sequence. But it just wasn't really... That's an
interesting point. I'll tell you what I reckon.
What?
Well, because sometimes there is a general idea that it's not an act that all men necessarily like. I think that when Olivia Wilde's out on the press tour talking about it being a feminist film, I suspect she chose that because the woman is empowered in that moment of the sex act, because it blatantly isn't her, going down on her husband. And I wonder, it doesn't really work out. Again, it doesn't tie in with the rest of Florence Pugh. What's her name? Alice. Alice's character's life. But that's all I wonder.
Yeah, I can respect what Olivia's trying to do there. It just didn't feel it felt half-baked. It felt like it was trying to say something, but it sort of said nothing because it was almost like a rule of threes wasn't followed or something.
Yeah.
There was two moments of it and not the third that kind of had a point. Or
Sure.
It just, yeah.
And speaking of half-baked, I think certain characters like Shelley, the Gemma Chan character, Frank's wife, what was that about? Like
With her stabbing him at the end.
Yeah. I guess there was something there. It felt like we had lost a scene or something.
Well, I know that as well, the character, because that's another thing. I thought, well, when she interacts with the neighbour who ends up kind of jumping off the building, that character apparently had far more scenes filmed in the film,
okay.
Which makes a lot of sense to me because I'm thinking, well, maybe her interaction with that character should have been the turning point for Alice to start having strange things happen to her. But she had strange things happening to her
before,
just out of the blue, and so it's like the script needed a lot more work and. Maybe they reworked it in the edit, and that's why we're feeling like things are missing.
Doesn't Gemma Chan's character, when she stabs Chris Pine, doesn't she say it's my turn now?
Yeah.
So that implies that she knows that she's been in the simulation and she's going to walk out of it? Or that she's going to stay in it willingly but be the boss of it?
It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I had that question as well. I don't know.
Like, so she willingly was just going along with this and then now decides to stab him? It's not clear in a film that is a lot of things that there are not. There's a lot of things that aren't clear.
All I was going to say about the do you forgive a film if blah, 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 blah. William, what was that amazing zombie film that you made us watch? Or that you, Or that you recommended?
One Cut of the Dead.
So, for people who haven't seen One Cut of the Dead, will I be spoilering it?
Yeah, it's a whole film based on one spoiler.
Yeah, I haven't seen it.
In that case, I won't spoiler it, but all I will say is...
Well, I know the premises. You've told me the premise. And they're making a film.
And then
the actual zombies come.
So I'm not going to talk about anything other than to say that to me is a film that, the first third or whatever, I'm like, this is kind of dumb.
Yeah, it's really bad.
And then it does what it does, and you're like, and then it's brilliant. So, but you have to sit through the third that's like, dumb, before you know that that's the case. So I wondered whether, that was my point in asking whether this film suddenly is elevated by its having a clever reveal.
Question. I don't know. I feel like I was liking a lot of the film as it was going along. It felt listless, but again, like the imagery was really cool. The central mystery, I guess it was there. I wasn't paying too much attention to it, but it was just really pretty, really stylish, and had pretty good performances, especially Florence Pugh, and I thought Chris Pine was really good as well. Although he should probably have more scenes. And the twist comes along, and I felt like everything after the twist kind of just diminished what the movie was about.
It's
and so maybe
isn't it?
The flip side of things. Yeah.
Isn't it interesting how that sort of thing... Isn't it interesting how something can be ruined
right.
or perhaps redeemed in a third act or a fifth act or something like that?
I'm just thinking as you're saying about, sitting through a film and then something changing and you're going, I think about Parasite, which has a clear shift halfway through that film, which is part of the joy of that movie.
Yeah.
But it has a really clear sense about what it's exploring, who its characters are, what their stories are, so that when that change happens, you're already fully invested in the ride.
It's not like, what the heck am I watching?
Yeah.
This is boring, blah, blah, blah. It's not like that.
Have you guys now seen The Green Knight?
No.
Okay.
Is this another that we're going to get to in 3 years' time?
I mean, last year I raved about it. It is a 4-act movie where the first 3 acts are pretty dull.
Dude, you're tenacious.
You're really selling it for us.
Yeah.
It's pretty, but beyond that, and then the 4th act comes along, you're like, hot damn!
Wow.
So if you're willing to sit through like an hour of slow, pretty imagery to get to that ending, I guess that's what you're
It's
saying,
worth
Sarah.
it.
It's totally worth it. And you completely understand why you had to sit through that.
Yeah.
What is your final thoughts? Who would like to start?
Okay, I'll go. Midsommar, what a treat. Just I hadn't seen it since loving it in 2019. And one of the things that really jumped out at me was the fact that so much of the imagery I remember. And I'd only seen the movie once. It really just stayed in my psyche, a lot of that stuff. I mean, your mileage may vary, but I thought it was an amazing comedy. More so than a horror movie. Just everything about that movie works for me. Even the length, like the build-up and the payoff is really, really good. Don't worry, darling. Again, going in with not the best mindset because I'd spoiled myself with all the twists. I still really enjoyed the visuals. The acting was decent for the most part. Some of it was a little over the top. I just felt like, as you guys have been saying and as we've been talking about in this conversation, just at a script level, the movie does not work. And it's a real pity because I don't think it's that difficult to fix if people were to go in and script doctor it up. So that's me.
Oh, I might jump off the back of that because I agree, William. I fully agree with your judgment of Don't Worry, Darling. My experience of going to see this film was I went with a friend of mine and I didn't realise it was that movie. I'd seen the trailer, but didn't connect it with the title and all the controversy.
With Midsommar.
No, with Don't Worry, Darling.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
I hadn't connected the trailer of Don't Worry, Darling that I'd seen at some point to this new film that was out. And so I went along thinking it was going to be a Lost in Translation style movie,
wow.
some kind of, one of those two people, two kind of actor partners, and Chris Pine comes in as the third love kind of triangle person. That's what I was expecting.
Oh, wow.
And so when it started and it was this Tim Burton-esque Gone Girl, I was like, oh, okay, that's this movie. And so I was quite intrigued and excited by the imagery. And then very quickly was like, it was breaking kind of fundamental classic cinema rules without an awareness of doing so, which just got my kind of, there was too many flags. And so by the time it wrapped up, I was just happy it was ending. I turned to my friend and I said, I thought that was a bad film. And she burst out laughing. Can I just say, I saw it at the Rialto in Newmarket. There's always little flies in that cinema. I don't know if you've noticed it. Sorry, just on the side.
Going up on the screen.
No, on the screen, but also just like fruit flies,
gross.
kind of little mosquitoes around. It's kind of damp and... Anyways,
okay.
I don't love that cinema. I love the selection of films that they play, but the actual cinema experience, they need to just get rid of those flies. And then Midsommar, like I said, it was wonderful. I saw that in Rialto Cinema as well when it came out, and there were flies as well there. No, loved Midsommar. Loved it even more on rewatch. I just had this gleeful joy about the horror and the joy and the light and the color and the journey that she's going on. And I think it's one of those films, and it will probably continue to be one of those movies where once I put it on, I'll just watch the whole thing, even though it is 2.5 hours, because it has this pace, this energy, this kind of enchantment, this trance-like state that it puts me in that is really wonderful to watch. So I'm really excited to see what Ari Aster does next. I agree with your criticisms of Hereditary, William, but I still really enjoyed that movie, mainly because of Toni Collette. She's just and Gabriel Byrne. Actually, the whole cast were just fantastic. So
Alex Wolff, man.
Yeah, he was brilliant. And I guess I'll just wait to see what he does next, and I will be a fan. He's kind of one of our new auteurs that has emerged in the last sort of 5-10 years of cinema. Sarah?
Well, a few years ago at a film festival, my husband and I saw the film Under the Skin, which was directed by Jonathan Glazer, a wonderful British director. It's a very creepy film, got old Scarlett Johansson to talk about Lost in Translation. It's a very creepy film, it's very well done, but it's also just quite ugh. And at the end of it, my husband was positively pulsing with glee about how wonderful it was, and I leaned over and whispered to him, well, I'm glad I'm not Mrs. Glazer. And I felt the same way at the end of Midsommar. Exceptionally glad not to have any relationship whatsoever with Ari Aster because, I think he's an excellent filmmaker, and I think it is a very, very fine film. And I don't overwhelmingly criticise it, even if I didn't love where it went. I don't object to where it went. But I wouldn't want to be... So we were saying earlier that notoriously he created it as a breakup film. No, that's not entirely true. He created the film while he was going through a very, very brutal breakup. And I do wonder when people say that. I think, oh, very interesting. I mean, I wonder about people who make horror and quite sort of like challenging content anyway, in terms of, golly, what's going on for you that you were even able to conceive of this. So yeah. Also, apparently, he has a real thing about decapitations and heads smashing and breaking, which, of course, they do a lot in Midsommar.
When you say a real thing, what do you mean?
He has a thing about it. Like, apparently, it's something he has kind of a... I believe he has almost not
like an obsession.
Yeah, kind of. But one of those
like
weird ones, I think, kind of an upset thing. But he does it a lot. He uses it a lot. But I think it comes from a place of trauma and upset.
Well, because I think if I ever made a horror, one of the things, I'm terrified of deep dark water, and I'd always make films about terrifying. You know, I would always explore that in my cinema.
Yeah, right.
So maybe it's like that.
I think that is a bit like that.
Who doesn't find the head being smashed and terrifying?
But so I was really impressed with Midsommar, and I was moderately impressed with myself for being able to handle Midsommar as well, because I'd received a lot of cautions about it. And I still think that the most effective bit of it, as we said, is the opening preamble. I still really like Come to Daddy, Don't Worry Darling, and I'd even see it again. I think it was beautiful. It was luxurious to luxuriate in. And I liked the reveal. I didn't question too much the things that we have subsequently questioned, and I think that does bear considerable thought. But I mean, the film got a real slamming, and I did not think that it was deserving of a slamming at all on any basis. I think that plenty of films have threads that aren't tied up, or contrivances, or whatever. I mean, this is not a spoiler. The Woman King is a fantastic film, and there are heaps of plot contrivances, and it doesn't ruin the film. So I think that's just how that is, and I agree with you, Jeremy. Olivia Wilde did a blimmin' good job of directing it. So, and I would rather be Mrs. Wilde than Mrs. Astor.
Well, thank you for listening to another episode of Cinema in Context, and thank you to Sarah for opening us today.
I just thought I would try and do it off the top of my head, because we've now been listening to that spiel for 5.5, 6 years.
Coming on 6 years.
That's right. So, I'm sure that we could all do it by heart.
If you enjoyed our podcast, then please share it with your film-loving friends. You can listen to Cinema in Context through Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Radio Public, Stitcher, Amazon Music, and Spotify. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Instagram, which are great places to let us know what you think of this episode, or give us a suggestion for a future film to discuss and compare. We will have one more episode of a comparison for November, and then we'll have our annual sort of cinema wrap-up of the year in December. So look out for that in a month's time. And until then,
Noho ora mai!